Well, let's continue with Donald Trump. As we noted, jury deliberations in his hush money trial have begun. And joining us right now is David Levinthal, editor-in-chief of Raw Story. Dave, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me back.
Listen, Donald Trump denies ever having an affair with Stormy Daniels, but it seems whether or not he's found guilty, it really is not dependent on that. It's whether or not he paid money to hide the affair ahead of the 2016 election. So to that, how important are the jury's assessments of Michael Cohen when we talk about a guilty, not guilty verdict here?
Quite important if you are the defense for Donald Trump, and they made their case over the span of several hours trying to discredit Michael Cohen, who had the closest proximity to anyone in Donald Trump's world when it came to those payments. And I should note, too, that the jury is not only going to have to decide, did Donald Trump falsify business records, but did he falsify those business records, those hush money payments, in an effort to hide this information from a general voting public that was going to be deciding in 2016 whether to elect Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and that information very well could have damaged Donald Trump's campaign in those final days. So Michael Cohen, discrediting them. The defense counsel at one point was offering several different superlatives and called Michael Cohen the human embodiment of reasonable doubt. I mean, it got pretty dramatic and pretty out there. It was some high level stuff there.
Okay, so yes, they are leaning the defense on reasonable doubt here. But, you know, if the jury does come up with a guilty verdict, a unanimous one at that, because it has to be unanimous. If they do come up with this guilty verdict, 34 charges is what Donald Trump is facing. How likely is it that he would serve any jail time? Because the New York City mayor says that a section of Rikers Island, the prison, will be prepared for the president if he's sent there.
A lot of legal scholars, Michael, don't think that it is likely that he's going to serve any prison time, and that if the guilty verdict comes down on any or all of those 34 counts, which should note are Class E felonies, each one could send Donald Trump to some sort of incarceration or detention for up to 4 years, that prison would be sort of the ultimate option, and not likely that home confinement or even probation would be something that would be much more likely in the scheme of this particular trial. One of 4 felony cases that Donald Trump is facing, the first of those 4. So if you're looking for Donald Trump to be let out of the courtroom in handcuffs, to be put away in prison immediately, not going to happen, especially since he has the right and the ability to appeal the verdict if ultimately it comes down as a guilty verdict.
Okay. And you know, what's also interesting about this is that when Americans have been polled on this, and I was looking at both an ABC Ipsos poll and also another one, basically said the vast majority of Republican voters are not going to be swayed on this case. Whether or not he's found guilty, whether or not he goes to jail, they're going to support Donald Trump. And yet the other cases that you pointed out, this is the first of 4, those could have impacts on Donald Trump, including one out of Washington, D.C. regarding January 6th. But how likely are those cases going to come up in court before Americans go and vote in November?
This could be the only case, Michael, that we have before Election Day, and it's entirely possible that we won't have a full resolution of this current case in Manhattan before Election Day either. If Donald Trump appeals, and most everyone expects that he will, if a guilty verdict is rendered in this case, that's a months-long process. And ultimately, it could come to final passage of Donald Trump's fate when the election had already taken place, when Donald Trump could potentially be the president-elect again. So this is something that is not going to go away anytime soon. A verdict is not going to be the final word in this, and this is going to be definitely a significant process that also, too, got to add into the mix the outside possibility of a hung jury. You mentioned before, it has to be a unanimous verdict. If you have a less than unanimous verdict, then we could be looking at the question of, are we going to have another trial all over again? Is the prosecution going to retry this? That's a real possibility, too.
Okay, so as these cases weave its way through the court, Dave, if Donald Trump is elected in November, because that is very much a possibility here, how many of these cases can he pardon himself in?
2 of the 4. So 2 are at the federal level. These are federal cases in federal courts. And Donald Trump, we get into some very rarefied constitutional theory and law here, but Donald Trump could, if president, attempt to pardon himself if he was convicted of a crime. But the case that we're dealing with here in New York City, and also the case that is pending in the state of Georgia, Fulton County, Georgia, those are state level affairs, and the federal pardon power does not apply in those. Only the governors of those states could actually pardon somebody who is convicted of a crime or commute their sentence. So different cases, different levels, different rules of the road, and that applies to pardoning in and of itself.
Okay, and the first, next stop, rather, in this whole process will be a verdict. The jury is deliberating right now. Any speculation as to when they might come out with a verdict?
Theoretically possible by the end of this week, but most people who are watching, and we had our reporter in the courtroom, think that this is going to be definitely a days-long process, maybe even weeks. So I think anyone expecting that they're going to find out what's going to be happening in this case verdict-wise by Friday will be disappointed. It's likely at least to go into next week. The jury has a lot of evidence to review and probably some questions too for the judge, which will be passed back and forth in the form of notes.
Okay, well, we are following it north of the border, Dave. Until the next time we speak, thank you for this.
Thank you, Michael.